thank you so much for
Thank you, Tim.
being nice and allowing us to host you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to you all. Can you hear me okay? This mic's all right? Fantastic. First of all, I can promise you it's not 2 hours from Chicago to Madison. It's the first thing I learned today, is I learned a kind of repertoire of knowledge. Before I start the presentation, I wanted to take a moment to say thank you, not only to Tim, but to the many people in the room who are working incredibly hard in and around the areas of poverty research. As a practitioner for the past 12 years, we rely so heavily on a lot of the work that you do, on the caring and the commitment you bring to this work to help us to practice better every and every day. So I appreciate that. I want to start by saying thank you for the commitment you make. I know we fight towards the very same goal in many respects. I'm going to start today with a story. And the story started 25 years ago in the Lower East Side of Manhattan, in what was then the most heavily photographed crime scene in Manhattan at the time. This was 1987, at the height of the crack AIDS epidemic. If anyone was in and around some of our large urban areas during that time, it really absolutely decimated communities in a just powerful way. I was matched at that point with a young boy, 10-year-old boy from the Dominican Republic, who turned out to be my best teacher in life. Many people say, who was your best teacher? Mine was a 10-year-old boy from the Dominican Republic. I spent every Saturday for 3 years with David, religiously, and didn't miss a Saturday. He came with me. If I was not there, he came with me. Ended up living with us over the years. I treat him very much pari passu my other children. Now he's 35 years old, married, beautiful wife, 2 beautiful children, college educated. But what I saw in working with David every Saturday in this housing development, and what I learned was, here's one of the most talented, hardworking, motivated young boys I'd ever met in my entire life, who had absolutely no ability or idea of how to get into the mainstream of this country. It struck me at that point that we were wasting a huge amount of human capital in a country where we don't have any human capital to waste. And it thought so strange to me that David's potential was being limited by things like his zip code, the bank balance of his mother, the school system he attended, and indeed the color of his skin. I'll give you one example of what I mean by that. I was David's parent on Parents' Night. So I went into the school, PS 156, Lower East Side of Manhattan. I said, hi, I'm here as David's parent. How is my son doing in class? And the teacher looked up at the sky and he said, David, 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 which one is he? And I thought, if that doesn't show you what educational inequality looks like in America, nothing does. I ended up writing my essays to get into graduate school about starting a program to somehow close what we've come to call the opportunity divide in this country, which I eventually had the good fortune to create, which then became what is known as Year Up. What I didn't realize at the time when I was working with David one-on-one is that he represented a much wider challenge that's happening in our country. And indeed, this graph, which is very poignant, measures the percent of 16 to 24-year-olds who are employed in the United States. And you just look at what happened from 2000 to 2011, the percentage of young people actually employed. When I first met David in '87, 63-odd% of young people were employed. It was now down in the 46, 47. So you started to realize there was a challenge happening here in this country where young people increasingly weren't in the labor force. And we're failing to get young people into the labor force in this country. And so what happens when you do that? Well, you get 6.7 million folks who are not in school, not working, don't have a high school degree, called disconnected. It's not a word we use. We call our young people opportunity youth, not disconnected youth. I feel it's a lot less pejorative. But there's a cost to this as well. So the Atlantic Monthly published some data recently, and I'm sure some of you have seen that data around the cost of disconnection at $93 billion a year, those 6.7 million young people. Over a lifetime, that's $1.6 trillion of taxpayer burden as a result of mortgaging effectively 17% of all young people in this country who aren't getting into the mainstream. But the last statistic for me is probably most important, is yet 77% of those young people believe that it's a good job, the good education is their responsibility. And in fact, poverty is not a character defect, as some may lead us to conclude or believe in this day and age. So as that's happening to youth over the past 10 years, Dick Murnane, who's done some wonderful research around this, talking about what skills are in demand and what are employers demanding of the workforce. And as one would expect, routine manual, routine cognitive work continues to decrease in its demand, and what's called complex communication and expert thinking. Sales is complex communication. Influencing someone, persuading someone, solving a non-routine problem, expert thinking. Those lines will continue to diverge, and therefore, in order to have a healthy economy, we're going to have to continue to produce folks who can meet those skill demands. And as that happens, yet we still got 3.4 million open jobs, and it's taking employers longer to fill open jobs than it has previously, which is a bit of a strange situation to be in, to have quite a few open jobs with that many people unemployed and that many youth who can't find a job, and employers saying we don't actually have people with the right skills, communication, teamwork, problem solving, critical thinking. And some pretty capable folks have started to lean into this and look at this skills gap much more closely. And it's not the entire 3.4 million, but a chunk of that population. So for us, when we thought about Year Up, we're effectively founded to help close that gap. We have 6.7 million young people. We know they're talented. We know they're assets. We have jobs that are going begging today, increasingly requiring both cognitive and non-cognitive skills to effectively perform in those jobs, and creating this gap that we look at every day. And that's indeed what our mission is to close that opportunity divide by providing those young adults with what they need: skills, experience, and support to realize their potential. And people often, in a hallway, a dinner party, or an elevator say, what do you do? I say, in 1 year, we take a low-income individual from poverty to a professional career. That's what we do. It's all that we do. It's all we've done for 12 years, for 6,000 young people, and it works. So how does it work? How does the program actually operate? If you look at the horizontal education experience, we work with low-income 18 to 24-year-olds who come to us typically with, on average, 3 barriers when they walk in the door. We measure those readiness factors or barriers, some call them risks, across the country in the same fashion, but it's former homelessness, past adjudication, past abuse, single parenthood, severe family dysfunction. So we'll measure those and categorize those as to how severe that barrier might be for that young person. On average, the student will have 3 of those walking in the door. But at the same time, they're motivated because they made a decision to walk in the door. So there's a self-selection of motivation, but a absolute adherence to we serve young adults who have barriers, and that's what we're trying to assess during our interview process. Young adults come to us 8:30 to 3:30, full-time. They are effectively in what would feel more like a corporate training environment than a school. So when you walk in, you're guaranteed going to be greeted professionally. People will be dressed professionally. It'll feel much different than a normal school would feel. And for those first 6 months, those young people are effectively learning 2 things. One, what we call ABCs, attitudinal, behavioral, and communication skills, which is probably half of what we focus on. And then the other half is a marketable skill, something we have identified a labor market need, everything from quality assurance testing through to desktop support through to fund accounting, a range of middle skill jobs which require more than a high school degree but less than a 4-year degree, that now make up about 30% of the labor market within the United States. And it's fascinating that that category, middle skill jobs, didn't exist 25 years ago. There are only 2 labor categories, college and unskilled workers, college plus and unskilled. And now you have this new labor category representing about 1/3 of all jobs called middle skill. So we train folks in both a professional skills and what we call technical skill. Students are dual enrolled in community colleges around the country at the same time, so they earn somewhere between 18 and 30 credits while they're going through this program. Our instructors will be approved as adjuncts of that institution, or else they will just validate the quality of the curriculum we're putting forth for young people. It's an intense environment for that 6 months, and after that 6 months, young people move into an internship with one of about 250 companies across the country. Any large bank, any large hospital, from JP Morgan, Bank of America, Goldman Sachs, Citigroup, through to Harvard, Yale, MIT, Brown, through to big hospitals, Kaiser Permanente, Coca-Cola, GE, Google, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, eBay, you name it. We're in those companies in providing them with a pipeline of talent. We don't go to the foundation. We don't go typically to diversity. We go to CIOs, COOs, and CEOs and say, we can show you a source of talent. Are you interested? If the answer is no, we can walk out pretty quickly. So that 6-month internship is a professional internship that adds value. Those two 6-month parts make up the year, hence year up. But what's critical for us is the top and bottom of that slide as well. Our young adults are provided with a great deal of support while they're with us. What is that support? How does it manifest itself? 2 words, it's caring adults. There's nothing you can do to replace caring adults in the life of a young person who hasn't had the consistency and care of a young adult, of an adult. That comes in the form of staff, in support staff who have social work backgrounds and/or clinical backgrounds. Over the past 12 years, I think I've seen one of everything that can go on in the life of a young person who comes from one of the lowest, poorest areas of this country. We also have mentors outside of the program. So business professionals, 1,500 business professionals will actually work with young people, an extra added level of support. And then indeed, if they need tutoring, we can find ways to provide that through volunteers as well. But we try to start that. Before a student actually fails a course, we're going to know up front where do they need support and help. So start it right up front with a plan to help them get on track. And combining developmental education with credit-bearing courses is, in my view, the right way to go. Rather than load people up in developmental courses that are dispiriting, it's actually learning how to do that concomitantly with a credit-bearing course. So it's very, very heavily supported environment for a young person. At the same time, it's quite strict. So students come in and sign a contract. They read it, they think about it, do they want to adhere to this? Now, contract lays out the expectations we have for them, and the consequences for not meeting expectations as well. So for instance, if you're 1 second late, we've got these atomic clocks, and I would have been subject today, you lose $25 of the $30 stipend you would have earned that day. And there's no excuses. If the bus is late, I guess you're going to have to learn that buses are late in life, and you're going to have to find earlier bus routes. We just don't accept excuses. It's not how we operate. We say, here are the rules, here are the expectations. You're an adult. We're going to treat you as an adult. You're responsible for that, for your behavior. So it's amazingly been poignant for me how many young people have come up to me and said, thank you for holding me accountable. No one has ever held me accountable before in my life. I mean, it's just amazing. I always thought, gee, this is a pretty onerous contract to live under. And I've never once, not once, have a student say, that's unfair or the wrong way to do it. It's thank you for telling me what the expectations are. And thank you for believing that I can adhere to those high expectations. That is the program we've run for 12 years. We try not to deviate a great deal from it. We think a lot about fidelity to a model and being able to prove things and improve things over time.
I'm Roland Cody Jr. I'm 22 years old. I grew up in Brooklyn, and then I moved to the Lower East Side, to Ruckus Houses, where David Heredia, who actually inspired Gerald Chertavian to found Year Up, is from.
I'm Marcellus Atkins. I'm 22 years old, and I'm from Harlem. I was always one of the smartest kids in my class. My father actually went to college. He didn't finish. That's why he refused to see me fail in school.
Even with all the protection and everything that my parents gave, I found some way to be a below average student, very below average, really to fit in. The cool thing was not to be successful academically.
I went to a class before school started, and then after school to get extra credit. I graduated high school when I was 16.
My parents wouldn't let me be cool enough not to graduate high school. So I graduated.
College seemed like the must-be option. I went to a BMCC for about a year, but I didn't know college was so expensive, so I just had to work and save up money until I go back to school. I worked at Modell's, I worked at Foot Locker and Toys R Us and Dwayne Reed. I'm pretty big. I'm like 6'5" and like almost 300 pounds. Every time I apply for a job, the first thing they assume is that I just want to be buried in the back lifting boxes all day, and I was just going to be manual labor for the rest of my life.
Life at that moment was going nowhere really. It was just wake up, go to Pathmark, go to Starbucks, get the check at the end of the week, and hope for something better than next week.
I came to Europe to prove to myself that, yeah, I can be something. The real thing that really interests me is that they said I can earn up to 16 college credits.
First thing you learn is professionalism, how to write correct emails, just how to carry yourself, how to dress professionally, things you shouldn't do in a corporate office. We have handshake drills in Europe. You just go down the line and shake everyone's hand, and then you get feedback at the end of it. A handshake gives off confidence. When you shake, it just has to be perfect.
I learned how to be accountable for my actions. I learned responsibility and time management. Europe just pretty much turned me into a mature adult.
Who knew I would be where I'm at now? I apprenticed at JP Morgan Chase, and then I was brought on as an employee. I'm actually a project administrator, maintaining the site, make sure everything is running well, make sure we still have space for both teams, some people in India, some people in the US.
When I tell people I work at JP Morgan Chase, the first thing they say is, so what are you, a teller? I work in investment banking as trade entry. The level of responsibilities I have as an intern is tremendous. What I have to do is DZ report, which basically transfer funds from a bank that merged into another bank, and it's a big responsibility.
We've had 70 interns who've actually come through JP Morgan Chase since we first partnered with Europe back in 2007. A number of them have gone on to part-time and full-time positions. It's a win-win in that we have a great source of young, hardworking, ambitious talent, and at the same time, they come in and contribute and make a difference and develop the skills that will enable them to cross the corporate divide.
JP Morgan has a relationship with Syracuse University. There's a scholarship involved. Right now I'm attending school part-time. I'm working at JP Morgan Chase, and if I maintain a 3.0 in the spring, I will be able to be a full-time student at Syracuse University. My GPA right now is a 3.3. It's pretty good. I'm still trying to boost it. I'm the oldest male out of my siblings. There's 7 of us all together. My parents didn't go to college, so I'm the first one in my household to attend college. And not just college, Syracuse University is a pretty big deal for everyone in my family.
My father passed away when I was 12, one of those ages where you really needed a male role model. Europe has placed me with a mentor, Josh Shapiro, and he's been a great mentor to me, just helping me plan out next steps in my life. It means the world to me. My plan is to go to college and just have a normal life the way it's supposed to be. Go to college, raise my family, and support them financially.
I'm a boy from the projects. Boy from the projects isn't supposed to be sitting with a man from Wall Street. I'm still on a mission. I want to graduate Syracuse University, first of all. I want to continue working in JP Morgan.
Europe has just reinstilled that confidence in me that I can do whatever I want to do. That, like, it's kind of funny when you're a child, your parents say, oh, you can grow up to be whatever you want to be. But as you grow up and you see things going on in your life and you see where everybody's ending up at, you kind of forget it. You kind of think that's just what you tell kids just to get them through the day. But after you're up, they made me feel like that again. They made me feel like I still can be whatever I want to be. I still can grow up and do whatever I want to do in life, period. And no one can stop me but myself.
So that gives you probably a better sense of the young people we work with, and what's always palpable to me is how self-confidence plays deeply, deeply into this process of a young person believing in themselves, that they can compete, that they can work alongside someone else who they may have perceived was different in some way, shape, or form. It's, I'd say, no greater blessing in my life than every day to get up, literally, and get to spend time with young adults like that, pretty much every day of my life. So we took that model, year up, and that's the results of the past 12 years in terms of our growth. This year we just opened up a new facility in Miami, and Silicon Valley is opening up as we speak. We'll serve about 1,700 young adults next year. So it's And look, that growth came for one reason, is because the JP Morgan Chases of this world said three beautiful words: we want more. They fund $25 million of our budget every year by contributing to us to have access to a pipeline of talent. That money comes from the line. In the last 4 years, there isn't a lot of spare money around in any company. So for the line of the business to pay for talent means the students are talented. So it's de facto, the proof is in the pudding. We could never have grown to this level without companies saying, this is what we need. Young people who are hungry, motivated, talented, who aren't job hopping after 6 months, who are grateful for a $35,000 a year job and want that job. And the results we've achieved, 85% of our grads and even our alums we've measured. We just did a major study. 61% surveys came back. We sent surveys to about 2,300 alums, some out 10 years. And we're told you won't get a 10% response rate. We got a 61% response rate. So both graduates and alums, 85% employed or in school full-time within 4 months graduation, averaging about $30,000 per year. And those corporate partners say that 95% of the young adults who walk through their door either meet or exceed expectations, which is why they continue to grow the program. When I come to why this has worked and what we've learned about providing this type of service to young people, there's a few things that really stand out in my mind. Excuse me. The first is the rubric or the operating principle we employ, which is called high support and high expectations. It guides every single thing we do, is combining what can sometimes feel ironic of holding someone highly accountable, but at the same time supporting them resolutely. So that whole process of we're no one's adult, we're no one's parent, we're not the authority figure, we set a context and a set of expectations, and you as the adult student decide whether or not you want to adhere to that. If you choose not to, you will not continue in the program, but we didn't do that to you. You're accountable for your actions, and we believe in you. We often say to students that the most respect we can pay you is to expect a lot from you, and they say thank you. So it's a combination of that high expectations that never are lowered. And let me tell you, when you think about, well, how hard is that? Well, imagine you have a single mom who had to come down 25 flights of steps because the elevator was broken in the housing development. And she had been late a few times in the past. And you know that if she's late this time, this final time, she will fire herself from the program. And you can even see her coming up the steps. And that clock just crossed the 12 o'clock mark. And you close the door, knowing that she has to open the door to get in, which means she's late, which means she's fired herself from the program. To create a culture that is able to hold young adults accountable is hard to do across 300 staff. To create that and understanding why that's important, why that's respectful rather than disrespectful. The context we operate in is most of us have worked in both private settings in our lives. So we've been in companies. We're not thinking about what JP Morgan Chase might be like. Most of us have had careers in and out. So we look for hybrid people who understand professionalism very well at all ranks in the organization. And we recognize that if we don't have social workers and clinical psychologists, you won't retain people, period. I mean, the amount of post-traumatic stress we deal with, the amount of depression we deal with, the amount of self-medication that we deal with, the amount of sexual abuse in women, I had no idea the levels of these within our urban areas. So if you don't have someone there who cares and is there when crisis hits, you're not going to get someone through this program, period. And that's where you put resources. That's what young people need. We put as much emphasis on both curriculum and indeed environment on professional skills. I'm not a fan of the word soft skills. I don't think there's anything soft about them. We say hard skills and harder skills. The harder skills are these non-cognitive skills around working with others and teamwork and communicating well. That is totally integrated into the curriculum. So if I was teaching computers or, say, troubleshooting, and as I was teaching the class, I saw someone over here not practicing good, what I'd call meeting management or meeting behavior, I'd stop class and say, here's a wonderful teachable moment. So let's call out what's happening. And so a classroom is a learning environment for character and professionalism, not just a vehicle to deliver content. And so we're trained pretty well as staff members in facilitation techniques, in how to give feedback in ways that are very effective for young people. I mean, the number of times I've been able to give feedback to young people that I thought, boy, this is going to be hard for them to hear, and they thank you for it because they know you care, and they say, how do you make that institutionally your culture? And it works. James Heckman calls these non-cognitive skills. I don't think we have a good lexicon for it in terms of what the one definition is we use. And the last piece of this around alignment with the labor market, we are highly, highly focused on what those companies need. So if, for whatever reason, Google isn't happy, well, why don't you send an instructor out to Google and say, well, what is it that I was teaching that didn't match what actually you needed? Or how are your needs adapting, and how would we tweak our curriculum to continue to keep up with the changes in the technology markets where our students are supporting? So we work very, very close with those employers. They're surveyed twice during that 6 months. We check in with them every 2 weeks to just see how's everything going. We invite them over quite a bit. So it's a very close relationship with the corporation, without which I think this would have a hard time working. So managing an internship program is very intense to get it right. And I'll talk a little bit more about engaging employers. It's typically my first question when I talk to a chief executive is, can you talk to me about where across your business you may be having any challenges hiring people? And specifically in that middle skill, lower end of your skill markets, and just listen and see what they say. I was talking to the CEO at ADP, and he said, you know, my real problem is my small business customer base is becoming heterogeneous. And I have a white, waspy sales force. And I don't know how to grow a heterogeneous sales force. That problem is going to manifest itself in a lot of companies over the next 10, 20, 30 years. So there are chief execs out there seeing these gaps and these challenges and looking for folks to help them with skilled labor. So typically when we talk with corporations, we talk a lot about a value proposition. So we can show you a pipeline of talent, pre-trained, pre-screened, at a cost base that was lower than what you would normally expect to pay to build a talent base. Would you be interested? Typically, they know their labor costs. We know their labor costs. We've studied those. The intern, we do a lot of work on transition management. So we'll have many young adults who've never been in a high-rise building before. Very few students who are on our Wall Street campus have ever stepped foot on Wall Street before. So it's the week before they start the internship, they go from their home to the office, touch the door, and look at their watch and see how long it took, right? So all the badging in the pre-screening, if you've never done that before, it's pretty threatening. It can be pretty intimidating to do. And if you're a low-income individual, you know, young man of color, go through the security desk downtown Wall Street and see how you're treated, right? So getting someone comfortable with these experiences is part of the process. So they're really ready to go. If the young person doesn't deliver in the internship, we don't get paid, period. We have $2, $3 million a month that comes in through this process. Student doesn't do well, we don't want money from anyone. So that we'll be out of business pretty quickly if we don't deliver, which aligns our incentives to make sure we're delivering for those young people. And then this constant feedback. Every 6 months, we're stepping back, retooling, readapting, learning, moving forward, and trying to build an operating system that is more nimble than in some institutions, I can't speak for any of some I've worked with, can get a little calcified in how quickly their curriculum can adapt to the needs of a labor market. And this, you know, at the end of the day, this produces results. Real results that are measurable. Our first causal evaluation, our randomized controlled trial, proved that our young people earn 30% more, not 3, but 30% more than the control group. That was over a several-year study. Mark Elliott at EMC, if anyone knows Mark, he's not prone to hyperbole. And him saying it was the most exciting results he's seen in the last 20 or 30 years in increasing wage rates for young people. In addition to Mark, I was sitting in the audience at Clinton Global Initiative and just minding my own business, and James Heckman was on the screen.
Unfortunately, when you start intervening with the very, very disadvantaged, The returns, the programs that we tried in the past, a lot of public job training programs, haven't been that effective. The good news is that there have been recently developed programs that are tailored, work-based training programs, programs that are recognize the importance of soft skills, that are trying to integrate children, many disadvantaged children, maybe less motivated children, to the world of work, and to teach them those soft skills, to teach them the importance of showing up on time, working with others, and the evaluations on those are very effective. So by the same scrutiny that I would say that the rate of return is very high on early childhood programs, if we're at the stage of 17, 18, and 19-year-old children, and we're saying a lot of these have been very disadvantaged, neglected in the public system in the past, we can still do something. But typically, where the interventions have been the greatest have been in the soft skill dimensions, the motivation issue, the engagement. It's not sort of reading, writing, and arithmetic for the 19 and 20-year-old. It's really getting them plugged into society and understanding their role. So I'm optimistic that we can do something. And this is a kind of creative complement to the kind of work you're talking about in the school system. We can do something, and I think the interventions are showing it. Recent successful evaluations of some program called Year Up, the National Guard Challenge Program, and the like are working with severely disadvantaged people.
So my BlackBerry after that started pinging pretty quickly, as you know, James Heckman talked to us, because he's really, as you know, has been very focused on youth and childhood investment, and not as pro to investment in older individuals. So for us, it showed the value of doing randomized controlled trial, and how important it was to have rigorous evaluation in our own program. So where do we go from here? 12 years in, Jim Collins, his best line of confront the cold hard truth. Cold hard truth is we built a really good island of opportunity within a sea of despair. And the reason is that we're small, right? 1,700 years, tiny. We rely too much on philanthropy. Can't scale anything with needing too much philanthropy. You've got to look at systems change as well as just direct service. So what are the systems around which our young people are involved in, and how do we try to impact those over time? But we also see some opportunities that it's a pretty interesting economic and political time. If you watch the DNC and even the RNC, how many times the word opportunity was mentioned. How people are seeing that social mobility is not a political concept, it's an American concept. And the fact that post this election, we're going to have a window for about 18, 24 months. We're going to be able to push this agenda of mobility and opportunity for Americans. And what I do know is there's some people leaning into this right now who are absolutely heck-bent on making a dent and really pushing it hard. So I think the stars are lining up around this, and we as one of many actors have some responsibility to say, how do you step into this? So the goal for me was, how do you design something that gets to 100,000 young people a year and solve for that? So forget what you do today, solve for 100,000 a year. And that's where we came up with our next 5-year strategy, which we're currently embarked in. We're not going to throw away our existing business. That's where we prove and improve what we do. So we are going to strengthen that core business, what we call it. We're going to develop that model that can get to 100,000 people a year, and I'll talk a little bit about what that looks like. And then we increasingly, although we spend about 7 to 8% of our time and money on systems change work today, we will increasingly do more of that. It's been more successful than I would have guessed in changing both systems from a legislative level as well as from just grassroots, engaging our alumni so they're changing their communities. And it's fascinating how this systems change is what I'm learning about it, not having come from that arena. So I'll talk just a little bit about that. The strengthening our core model will grow modestly to serve about 2,500 young people. So new cities, growth in those existing states in which we're in. But the real goal of that core is prove and improve. So constantly prove and improve the model. We engaged in the ISIS study, which some of you may be aware of. That's a national study with 9 or 10 organizations, $20-odd million, 3 to 5 year randomized controlled trial. We're in the process now of launching a 1,000-person randomized controlled trial to look at longer-term outcomes and to look at some of these self-confidence or self-efficacy factors as well, which APT is helping us work on. So prove and improve and learn in that core business. At the same time, we're now launching models in community colleges. So take what we do, forget being a freestanding entity, put it into a community college. Their instructors can teach probably half of the English and or technology skills. We'll do the social emotional support and the professional training, and we'll still do that internship. When you combine that, use their infrastructure and their instructors, you take the cost base down to where you require no philanthropy. So it's a Pell Grant and a internship fees, and you've covered the whole cost base. It actually throws off cash. So we've launched this in Baltimore for the last 2 years. We've been doing this in Baltimore. We just recently launched in Miami-Dade under Dr. Padrone's leadership, who's been fantastic in helping us. And this is a model that can scale because the capital requirements is so much less and the operating requirements is zero on a fundraising basis. So that we're doing now, and I'll just give you a quick clip on that. Talks about what we're doing in that model.
By 2018, 63% of all the jobs in America will require some kind of post-secondary education, not necessarily a 4-year college degree, but some kind of post-secondary education. Only about 30% of African Americans and 20% of Latinos in their mid-20s have earned the equivalent of 2 years of that kind of education, an associate's degree. Allowing this opportunity to persist not only wastes the potential of an entire generation of talent, but poses a real threat to the strength of our workforce. And again, it's a constraint on the growth of the economy that affects us all. Last year, in response to these challenges, Europe made a commitment to respond by developing the Professional Training Corps, a year-long program to combine community college courses, internship placement, and a learning community of mentors that set underserved students on the path to career success. So, to tell us more about the Professional Training Corps, I want Sean Bowen, the National Director for Strategic Growth and Impact at Europe, and Kai Smith, a graduate of the Corps, to come and tell you what they've done for the last year.
The promise of America is that each and every one of us has power to write our own story. This means that if we are given the right support from people in society, and that if we work hard, we can forge a path to a better life. This wasn't true for me growing up in Baltimore. I always had a passion for media and technology, and I knew I needed to go to college, but lacked the right resources and guidance to prepare for my future. Before enrolling in Europe, I had left college and was working at 2 restaurants without any career prospects. I knew I wasn't reaching my full potential, and I felt that my story was being written for me, that my zip code would become my destiny. I am now working full-time at Radio 1 as an IT network technician. My experience at Europe helped me write my own story. I'm a talented young man with a bright future. I'm an IT professional. I'm a valued team member. I'm a role model in my community, and I'm an economic asset to this country. I am proud to be here today to share my experience and support Europe's commitment to make America a country in which every young person, no matter where they're from, can create their own story. Thank you.
It sounded to me like he ought also be a future mayor of Baltimore. Let's give him a big hand. Thank you very much.
Get a sense of that model is Professional Training Corps. It's like ROTC in a 4-year college. It's PTC in a 2-year college. So Professional Training Corps, you swap fatigues for business attire. You don't learn about military moves. You learn about Microsoft mouse moves. You don't go on a field training exercise. You go on an internship. Now, ROTC serves 100,000 folks in the country today. So these models can scale and can work at much, much larger levels. Now, last thing we're doing, just talk a little bit about the systems change work. We see that as threefold. It involves perceptions, practices, and policies that we have to lean into as an organization. The perception of young people right now, like Kai Smith, is that he's a social liability. Right? That's the dominant rhetoric in America. Kai's a social liability. We have to change that social liability concept to make sure Kai is seen, as he talked about, being an economic asset in this country. I'm very pleased to tell you, yesterday we got sign-off that the Ad Council is going to spend $25 million on that concept of thinking how to rebrand young people from being social liabilities to economic assets and get employers to engage more with this group. So we've been pitching this for 2 years and just got a call last night that they're going to do that. $25 million in the advertising is a start down this path. So changing perception is critical. Changing the practices. Like, why do you need a 4-year degree to apply for a job? Very hard to answer that question as an employer. If you could ask the employer, what do you really want? I would love professionalism and work readiness. I would love skills in accounting. I would love ability to write an email and write properly. Okay, if I could show you those things, would that take the place of what you're using the 4-year degree for a proxy for? So increasingly, this country, I think, as we think about higher education differently, credentialing 2.0 is going to start to change the way in which we think about the practices. So many of our companies have changed their labor hiring practices to allow our young people to work there, when previously it said need not apply if you don't have a 4-year degree. So this is doable, but it's got to involve practices and change of practice. And then the policies. I mean, Workforce Investment Act, as we all know, hasn't been reauthorized in the last 6 years. It's 6 years overdue. How tax codes incent human capital development rather than just hiring. I mean, there's a lot we can do legislatively, but our belief is unless perception changes and practices change, policy is not going to be there. So we do focus on those pretty heavily. I'll end, this is one of my favorite photos of 12 years within Year Up. I often say to folks in the organization, when you bury me, I just want 3 things on my grave: good father, good husband, and that photo. And I'll be more than happy to get in it. We talked a lot about programs and talked about policies and systems, but at the end of the day, this all comes down to people. It all comes down to human beings, right? So last weekend, Rashawn Facey Castillo comes over my home. Rashawn graduated 6 years ago. I had the pleasure to be at his wedding to Najaya, who's in St. Martin, very nice place to go for a wedding. Although when they tell you they start at 4 o'clock, they don't in the islands. They start at 7. So for 3 hours, my wife and children sat in the sun waiting for a wedding to start. It doesn't start till 7. If you go to an island wedding, know that. So he came by with a 2-month-old son, with Najaya, with Rashawn. Rashawn, who had spent a year incarcerated as a youth, not an adult, but a year incarcerated, because he was protecting his mother from abuse from his father. And I think, boy, what would I have done in that situation? And he said, the first time and last time I've ever been violent in my entire life. And I'll do it again today because I was protecting my mother. And it cost him 1 year of his life. Rashawn now works at Bank of New York Mellon. He manages 14 people. He makes $75,000 a year. He hired 3 Year Up graduates and 2 Year Up interns. You know, talk about systems change, right? It's not just policies. It's Rashawn's the system, right? He's making the decisions as the hirer. And as he sat in my patio, he shook his head and he said, I never, ever, ever thought I'd be able to take care of my family, to work in a place where I'm respected, to actually make decisions that impact other people's lives. He said, when you're inside a detention, these things don't even seem like they're within dreamland. And he just really shook his head and he just said, I just never thought this would be my story. And so as we think about what we're doing, for us, it's never get away for a moment from the fact that it does come down to young people and individuals and the good fortune to work with them every day, whilst we're also working in Washington and other places. But none of us ever get away from that. Every person who works at Year Up commits to work with young people, period. In some way, shape, or form, whether you're the bookkeeper or the security, I don't care who you are. If you work for us, you work with young people. And so that we had a walk for opportunity one day down in Washington. That was just a handful of the young people who were walking. And it reminds me that when Martin Luther King died, and his ascendancy and what his most dominant thought process was economic justice. And if you look at the buttons that they wore on the March on Washington in August 28, 1963, they didn't just say freedom, they said freedom and jobs. In fact, I have one of those buttons that I bought on eBay. And so what struck me is these young adults are actually carrying on a pretty important part of the civil rights journey, which is about economic justice. They need a context, they need a runway, but they don't need anyone to do anything for them. They just need the access and the opportunity to realize their potential. And in our small way, Europe's been very grateful to provide that access for a group of wonderful young people across this country, and long may it continue. I'll stop there, Tim, and happily answer any questions. When you talk about looking upstream, is the way I call it. I sometimes look at myself and I say, you've designed a good emergency room. But life shouldn't be about replicating emergency rooms. It's not that we won't need them. It's not that Europe won't have a place in society. But if the strategic thrust is to build emergency rooms, then I'm not a very good strategist, because we should be trying to keep patients healthy and look at prevention rather than cure. So I was asked to join the Board of Education for Massachusetts 5 years ago by Deval Patrick, our governor. And the reason I wanted to do that is we could look at this million-person system with 70,000 teachers and 1,500 schools and 360 school districts, 300 school districts, and start to say, all right, what can you do earlier, as you quite rightly said? And if I just finished a task force with about 30 really high-quality people, that heads of a lot, commissioner of higher ed, undergrad, the CEOs, a lot of bright research, and said, what would career readiness look like in middle and high school? And what would we need to do to infuse that to the 400,000 or 500,000 young children in middle and high school in Massachusetts? So that was about a 9-month process. And my firm belief is we say the words college and career ready, and we do nothing about career readiness. We clearly know we're not doing college readiness. I mean, that's already pretty clear. But to also say the word career ready, when not one person has really done much about it other than anecdotal, you bump into an internship because a large company gives a few. That's dispiriting to young people in the system. So we'd spend a lot of time thinking about what upstream might look like. We even thought about backing a year up into the second half of 12th grade, which can often be a wasted semester for young people. And there's a maturity issue because we are working with companies, and so that you have to be very careful around that. That's, I guess, part of our learning in that process. And then the other issue you mentioned of teaching some of these executive functioning skills earlier, I was coaching, I have a 14, 12, and 9-year-old, so I was coaching the basketball teams. And my daughter was the only woman and the only Caucasian in the team. And so I thought, okay, this is going to be an interesting experience. And the boys were not passing to the one girl. And so I said, and these were at that point 9-year-olds, and she was 9. And I said, well, how am I going to manage behavior? And I said, the only behavior I know to manage is 18-year-olds. So I'm going to do the exact same thing I did with the 18-year-olds to 9-year-olds, literally down to the same facilitated techniques, the same. And so they'd show up to practice, and they'd have to look each other in the eye. They'd have to shake everyone's hand before the practice started. They had to learn everyone's name, and we did name and favorite food. We do an exercise to help generate name recognition. We talked about how you give feedback to your colleagues on the team. And these are things I'm doing with 18, 19-year-olds. And the 9-year-olds got it, honestly, quicker and adopted it without any hassle. And they would come to practice and go up and, how you doing, John? Nice to see you. And I was like, we are not expecting enough from our young people. And that my other data point on that was I was in a high school in my Board of Ed role, and the governor was there, and everyone was behaving so well, and he was doing some experiment. And then he walked out, and I was next to the governor, and the bell rang, right? And it turned into cacophony, literally cacophony, in jostling, that real shouting. I mean, the decibels must be so high. This is one of the tougher high schools in Boston. And I would say felt threatening. I grew up in one of the toughest high schools in Lowell, Massachusetts at that point. And so I know what tough high schools feel like. And this reminded me of being right back in high school. And I then picked out a bunch of young people because this was so unsettling. And I said, do you really like what's happening right now? And you know what they said? No, but no one's helping us, expecting us to do it differently. No one's told us that this is unacceptable. And I was like, my God, we're failing these young people by not expecting them to get out of class and behave civilly and treat each other respectfully because they want to do it. They want us to say that to them. I feel often we're letting our young people down by not holding standards that they would wish we held for them, especially in our high schools in this country. And I ask them all the time, do you like the environment? What could you? And they all say, I hated the environment, but no one held anyone accountable. So So if anyone had any questions, I'd be happy to address one or two. Yes, ma'am.
On that note, I was struck by your talking of Carolyn's response of how the kind of school accountability movement is moving in a complete opposite direction of what you're talking about. So we're not measuring, so when we're like holding teachers accountable or when we're talking about, you know, the product or how we measure student skills in school, it's through tests and through, you know, subject matter
Right.
areas. So I think, you know, if you're talking about systemic change, you know, what is your thinking about how we build that into what we expect schools to be giving students?
Right, if we're only measuring, if we're not even willing to measure that. I think we first have to, I can speak a little bit more about the community colleges as well. That I don't think anyone in community college teaching today feels they have a right to talk about attitude and behavior in the classroom. I don't think they see it as their raison d'etre, that's what they're supposed to be doing. So as the teacher feel like, I actually have responsibility for what's happening in front of me. So at the community college level, what I'll comment on is in Miami-Dade and Baltimore, the other teachers are coming into our classrooms where students are dressed properly, treating each other well, and they're saying, how do I get me some of that? Because I'd love for my students to do that. And so I think there's a real opportunity without that much work to start to change tone and tenor in our community college settings. When our students wear suits, I was worried when we first had a group of students go to Baltimore and dressed in suits, would they be ridiculed or laughed at? And lo and behold, they were thought of cool. Wow, you look great. How'd you get that? You look sharp. And so I have this dream, if you could ever get community colleges feeling and looking more like that in that seriousness of purpose and connected to labor markets. So if you go back to your direct question in high schools, look, we say we have an assessment system and we don't. We have tests, for the most part, that are summative. The next generation of assessments is not here yet in many of our high schools to look at some of the broader areas of assessment. We use a test when we talk about a system. It's not that we should throw out the test, but we have to put a lot more effort into proper evaluation assessment systems that may measure broader measures. But we don't have that today because it's too costly often. I mean, it's on the Board of Education, I see it, and we always default to what we can afford, which is a bubble test rather than a better assessment. But I do think it's changing.
Well, Gerald, you're late, but we let you in.
Thank you.
On the other
I
hand,
appreciate
didn't
it.
wear my
$25.
tie, so I'm not dressed for this. But thanks so much for coming.